Let's talk about incredible people who are an inspiration to us all in these strange isolation times. I want to bring on my first guest, world record holder 10 times over, endurance athlete, Colin O'Grady. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I really appreciate it. So we have about 4 minutes before break. So I'm going to take this time to set up really who you are and what you're doing. And then in our next two segments, we're going to get into you in a deep dive. So, you in your 20s, you're an active kid, you're from the West Coast, you're hiking, you're out and about. You decide after college to go traveling, and you're a healthy person. You have a horrible burn accident, and the doctors say you might never walk normally again. This encourages you to say, I take that challenge. That is not going to be my life. And you set on to run a triathlon. I'm going to just give the cliff notes here so we can see the kind of person that you are. You go ahead to the Chicago Triathlon and you win it. And then you go on from there to hike the 7 highest peaks around the world, to cross the Antarctic by yourself and break a record there. And then you just recently crossed Drake's Passage by rowing a boat with some colleagues. Tell me, why are you doing all of this?
Yeah, there's a lot there. Obviously that spanned a long period of time. The burn accident was in 2009, and the most recent projects, the solo crossing of Antarctica and the Drake Passage, were in the last couple of years. But, for me, it comes from a passion to, push the edges of my potential, find out what my own limits are, as well as sharing that with others and hopefully to inspire them along their own journeys, even if that's not in endurance sports. But whatever that is, we all face obstacles and challenges in life. And I believe as humans, we have these reservoirs of untapped potential inside of us to achieve extraordinary things, particularly when we can get our minds and body rights and focused towards these positive outcomes.
Yes, I love that. And that's so true. And of course, we're all experiencing this together. In a way, there's some camaraderie as we're all in this coronavirus together. So there's lots of lessons that can be applied, I think, now. But before we get into some of those lessons and also what you eat and how you train and what you've learned about yourself, I mean, in Antarctica, I think you were alone for 139 days in, negative 80-degree weather, carrying a sled of over 350 pounds. I mean, we're talking about an incredible endurance there. But take me back to the early times. You're in Thailand, you're incredibly burned, you're in that hospital bed, and the doctor says you might never walk again. What do you say to yourself?
One correction. I was in Antarctica for 54 days alone by myself. 139 was a different world record project. But
Whoops, getting my world records confused.
Was certainly a long amount of time to be alone. It's the physical trauma of being severely burned on the level that I was. 25% of my body severely burned, particularly my legs and feet. The physical trauma was immense, but nothing like the emotional trauma of having a doctor look you in the eyes and say, hey, you'll probably never walk again normally. I've been an athlete throughout my life and kind of identified as someone who is, able-bodied and able to walk around, and that was a huge identity shift if that diagnosis were to come true. But fortunately, there's sort of the hero of the story in my mind is my mother. She came and found me in this rural Thai kind of makeshift hospital, and she kind of, instead of kind of leaning into that fear and believing what the doctors were saying to me, she kind of leaned into positivity and kind of wrapped me up in love and positivity and saying, hey, what do you want to do when you get out of here? Let's set a goal. And I focused my goal on seeing if I could complete a triathlon. Not something I'd ever done before in my life, but it kind of gave me something to work towards every single day to kind of fight back and hopefully overcome this huge obstacle in my life at the time.
Yeah, it's incredible. So much of being able to succeed, it is that mental battle. And of course, the physical one, we'll talk about your diet and training when we come back from break, but it's also that support community. I know your fiance now is so supportive of what you do. And then it does come back to moms. I mean, my gosh, is there anything better than a great mom? And that gives us all a platform from which to start. We are going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to dive deep into the diet and also the exercise that you do to prepare for this. If you're watching on Facebook, you're going to see a break here for about 2 minutes. Sit tight. It's the Elysabeth Alfano Show. Selling book Impossible First is out. You're going to want to get it after you hear from him. It's some incredible feats that he's done, not only physically, but really mentally, which is what we're going to talk about as well. Okay, so right before break, we're talking about your mom comes to give you sort of a pep talk about how do you want your life to go and how are you going to pick yourself up. And you decide to do, after your extreme burn accident, set yourself up for a triathlon. Tell me how you prepare, if it's the same now, that you do the same kind of preparation, or if you've done any changes, and tell me about your diet.
Yeah, obviously a lot has changed in the last, 10 or so years of being a professional athlete from my first triathlon. I guess the basics kind of stay the same. It was a long road getting out of that wheelchair and taking the first steps. It was a long road to recovery to get from that hospital bed in the wheelchair to, a start line of a triathlon. But kind of through the positivity of my mother at first, and then, joining a local gym and just getting my body, stronger every day. Definitely what I eat has been a huge, part of my life, and definitely attributed that to my recovery. My parents, my dad's actually an organic farmer on the North Shore of Kauai, and my mother and stepfather started a chain of natural foods grocery stores in the Pacific Northwest, called New Seasons Market. So I was kind of raised around that kind of environment, long before, I guess, words like plant-based or people even knew what natural foods or health food was, in the late 80s and early 90s, kind of when it was still on the fringes. That's the environment that I was raised in, but certainly has had a major role in success, and then that has grown over time. We can talk more specifics about what I've done now, but that's kind of the background on that of how I was raised.
Yes, so I think you have always been, or for a significant amount of time, vegetarian, and then on your recent endeavors, couldn't take dairy with you, and so you were vegan when you crossed Antarctica by yourself, and also Drake's Passage. So those are your two most recent, and your book Impossible First is all about crossing Antarctica by yourself and breaking that record, and also your isolation therein. And I do want to get to that, but let me just because you win the triathlon. I think the whole timeline is so interesting, and I just want to highlight all the records that you've done. So from there, you go to hiking the 7 highest peaks around the world, one of them, of course, being Mount Everest. And so this far on your journey, I'm kind of following you mentally in that triathlon, there's a lot of socialness to this. I've done a half marathon myself, barely made it, but yeah, I can see the social aspect. It's very fun. The same with the 7 peaks. A lot of people in the world talk about, I'm going to climb all 7, Annapurna, Mount Kili, and Mount Everest, of course. But then you go and set your sights on Antarctica. Tell me why that was a challenge you wanted to give yourself.
Yeah, to me, I was fascinated by Antarctica. On the 7 Summits World Record, I was in Antarctica because I was climbing the tallest mountain in Antarctica then, and so kind of just fell in love with Antarctica, and certainly the long history of polar travel, going back to Ernest Shackleton and Captain Scott and the Amundsen, the folks who were at the turn of the 20th century, really exploring down there was always fascinating to me. But really, Antarctica, I was really fascinated by doing something or attempting something that no one in history had ever accomplished. So not only was it a world record, but it was also a world first. No one had ever crossed the landmass of Antarctica unsupported and solo. Unsupported means no use of kind of resupplies or any like gear. Basically, I had a sled that I had to pull all my gear in. It was weighed about 375 pounds. And then also unassisted, so no use of like kites or dogs or anything to help pull you. It's just kind of mano-y-mano. And people had attempted this previous to me, but no one had been successful in completing it. And so to me, I was just very curious about doing that, as well as, again, sharing the story as broadly as I can. I have a nonprofit that I run. There's 600,000 students enrolled in my nonprofit programs, which is all about inspiring kids around health and wellness and getting outside, as well as curriculums that we build around STEM curriculum and exploration. And so really just as an avenue to explore my own kind of potential, but also in a way that I can kind of have a ripple effect of positivity out in the world as well.
Yeah, I love that. And we'll get to your foundation for sure. But staying on Antarctica for a while, first of all, I love that you did it, as you say, mano-y-mano, totally solo. So a lot of people in the past have tried to do it with dogs, et cetera. And, we can get into the Iditarod and all that is not good for dogs in that race. But that's another show. But for you, I love that you decided to take on the personal challenge just yourself. So tell me, first of all, I think you said it was 54 days. Give me the conditions. So you're pulling something that's like 350 pounds. It's negative 80 degrees. I mean, What resistance, headwind, haha, what do you have challenges for you on a daily basis when you take on something like Antarctica?
Yeah, I mean, the average temperature in Antarctica is about minus 25, minus 30, but the wind chill, as you mentioned, it's 50, 60-mile-per-hour winds can definitely get up to about minus 70, minus 80. So I'm pulling my sled with all my supplies in it. The sled started out weighing about 375 pounds. And from a
Oh,
kind of food and a vegan angle, one of the most interesting pieces was try to how to maximize that weight, or basically how to maximize the best food and nutrition I could have in the sled without making my sled too heavy, because the people who had attempted previously, one person made it 900 miles and then fell ill and ultimately died 100 miles from completing the crossing. Another guy attempted the crossing and ran low on food and supplies and had to be rescued. And so there's kind of this complicated math equation of how much you can pull. Obviously, if you just brought as much food as you wanted, you would have 1,000-pound sled. You could never move it on the first day. And so I work with this company called Standard Process, which is a whole food supplement company, to create this basically specific plant-based food for me that they nicknamed the Colin bars. And we'd spent a year in a food science lab actually studying all my physiology, all my sort of metrics on my body, and et cetera, and came up with that. And honestly, although I've kind of opted towards a more plant-based and vegetarian diet throughout my life, I didn't start them on that premise and say, hey, this has to be plant-based. I said, let's look at all the options to see how we can optimize this. And after all the research and all the testing and all the kind of top doctors in the working on this, what 20 PhDs and doctors working on this, what they came up with was the actual most optimal solution for my body, for my health, for my sustained endurance, etc., was entirely plant-based. And where a lot of people have attempted this project in the past, going back 100 years, people have used something called pemmican, which is essentially like bacon and animal fats and things like that. And what they found over time, and kind of one of the reasons I think I was able to do this and no one in history had ever been able to complete it, was that over a long duration of time, all that plant protein, animal protein and fats were leading to some long-term problems for people as the body got more weak and diminished. Whereas with me, I'm in a fully plant-based solution. Of course, I was losing weight because no one could carry enough calories to replenish all the calories. I myself was actually getting stronger and stronger. My body was recovering faster in between the days with a more clean plant-based diet. And I attribute that to a huge amount of the success in Antarctica.
I've interviewed so many plant-based athletes, and they all say the same thing, that they recover so much quicker, and that allows them to get right back at it and either train or actually perform faster, harder, and without the kind of damage that an animal fat-based diet would have for them. So that's wonderful that you say that. And I hadn't realized that you guys had been working on your own food so that you can maximize the weight of it. How cool is that? And how great that they were supportive in that way.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, Standard Process did an incredible job, and I've continued my work with them. And also the bars, we kind of created a new derivative of them for the my most recent crossing, the Drake Passage crossing in the rowboat. Same thing, completely vegan for that crossing as well, which is rowing a boat 700 miles from the southern tip of South America to Antarctica. So 30, 40-foot swells, icebergs, in a tiny rowboat with no motor, just me and 5 other people propelling it ourselves. And I was completely vegan for that project as well. And again, it worked incredibly well, and was able to do, again, that was something no one in history had ever completed either. And so, it just goes to show people have attempted these various different challenges and expeditions over time. And, I think mindset is key. I think other pieces of training are key, but nutrition is certainly one of the key factors. And, being able to work with these incredible, lab of people in this Standard Processes Nutrition Innovation Center and come up with these plant-based solutions has been amazing to see what I've been able to do. And when I was crossing Antarctica, and I write about this in my book, The Impossible First, it actually ended up turning into somewhat of a head-to-head race. There was another guy, a British explorer, attempting the crossing at the exact same time. Which was pretty interesting. We didn't really, other than one time we saw each other out there, but we started on the exact same day. And we were basically in this crazy head-to-head race, not just racing history, but racing each other. And I was able to come first, but he did finish a few days behind me, becoming the second person to ever complete this crossing. But as him and I, it was a heated battle, obviously, when it was happening. But afterwards, we've stayed in touch and been friends. And one of the things he said in reflection is, he's like, man, what you did with that food, he's like, I kind of ahead of time, I thought you were doing it wrong, because, us explorers, we've always used, animal fats, and if that's the only way to get the protein. He's like, but now in retrospect, he said to me, wow, I actually think what you guys did there might have been the difference between why you're able to perform better than me and why you're able to finish first and stuff. So even he was like, wow, next time I go to Antarctica, you want to try something like that. So it's interesting to hear that
Next
from
time
someone
I'm
else.
hanging out in Antarctica, I'll just bring
Yeah.
my plant-based food. Well, so that's interesting to me because that was going to be my next question. Did you get any resistance from the people around you or other athletes or other endurance challengers if they were saying like, oh, your diet is wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that's probably less and less common now. I mean, I know that, certainly over the last 5-10 years, the plant-based diet has been proven pretty much over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I've been on Rich Roll's podcast 4 times. So he's a good friend of mine, and, people like that who have advocated for, plant-based diet, and obviously not just advocated it, but proven it out. Guys in the NFL, MMA fighters, et cetera, bodybuilders. There's a lot of people who have kind of proven that out. There's certain people that are still like, oh, that's not for me for whatever reason, but I don't think there's quite as much resistance now as there may have been, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And just the more people that high perform at that level, I think, more and more people are at least accepting of that, which I think is great, because I think that that's ultimately what changes, social norms and habit patterns.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think that coupled with, it's becoming more and more mainstream. There's more and more stories like yours, of course, as you say, Rich Roll, he's been on my podcast before. He is wonderful. But, and then now we have coronavirus, which is adding just another layer of complication to a public health scenario. And, of course, then we have the environmental discussion and the resources therein. So it's all kind of coming to a head, and you can see the turning of the Titanic, which ultimately I think is going to mean people on a day-to-day basis are feeling better and are healthier. And we're about to go to break, but I want to talk about when we get back, of course, Drake's Passage and your foundation, but also the mental fortitude, the connection between diet and mental fortitude, because I do think there is one. Half of this is staying strong mentally. So when we get back after break, folks, sit tight on Facebook. You're going to see a little bit of just my picture, but in 2 minutes, we're back. It's Colin O'Grady right here on the Elysabeth Alfano Show on WCGO. Switch gears, everybody. If at first he was doing a triathlon, and if then he was hiking the 7 tallest peaks around the world, and then he went solo just by himself, pulling a sled across Antarctica, now he's switched to rowing. So Colin, what made you want to row the Drake's Passage? And to be clear, everybody, that is between Antarctica and the southern tip of South America.
Yeah, so Drake Passage, for those who are familiar with seafaring, is known to be probably the roughest water in the world. It's certainly one of the most roughest passageways in the world. A lot of histories of shipwrecks and sort of crazy things that have happened in that waterway in the Southern Ocean. It's also extremely cold. It's the water is basically freezing. There's icebergs in the water, penguins, whales, etc. And I had actually never before in my life rowed a boat anywhere. I had never rowed a boat like at summer camp or in college. It was a completely new medium for me. And sort of one of my deep curiosities is, I love the concept of growth mindset, this ability that all of us have, this ability to learn and evolve and grow, that we're not sort of a set of fixed characteristics, that we can actually adapt. But certainly taking the mindset and the experience I had in all these other expeditions, but applying it to a new medium. And I've always been fascinated by the ocean and the open ocean as the next place I wanted to explore. And so me, and I wasn't alone this time, there were 6 of us total, attempted this row this past December, so about 4 months ago. And we're successful in completing the crossing, 700 miles, completely human powered. So there's no, motor or anything on the boat. It's us just with rowing oars. It was 90 minutes of rowing and 90 minutes of resting the entire time around the clock. So you can imagine what that looks like. Just 90 minutes on, 90 minutes off, 90 minutes on, 90 minutes off in groups of 3. And basically in this barely enough room to sleep. There's not like a big cabin or a bed. You're kind of smashed down in this like undercarriage, like smashing around against the walls as the waves are, spilling over us. So it was quite an intense expedition, to say the least. And Discovery Channel did a huge film project around it. That there's a big feature-length documentary film that Discovery Channel will be putting out in the next few months here. There's some of the episodes already up online. There's the shorter ones, but a full feature-length will be out soon, which will be fun to see.
So it doesn't seem, most of this is for your own personal challenge and to see what you can do and to see what you can learn about yourself more than the nature or exploring the world. Although you do get to see penguins and whales, and I know it's stunningly beautiful, but it's more about the personal challenge, it seems to me, for you. Can you explain to us a little bit what you learned about yourself on both of these extreme challenges and what you impart to others?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's exactly right. I think there's a much deeper purpose than just my own kind of personal exploration. One, I do love the environment. I'm a huge advocate for things around the environment, as well as the exploration of far off places, as well as the work that I do with nonprofit. I've worked with millions of students around the world through my nonprofit initiatives, and that's one of the big driving forces behind what I'm doing this. But certainly, there's been a level of personal desire and curiosity that's been cultivated throughout this process, and what I've learned, and certainly what I've learned, I like to bring back and apply to others. My book, proud that it reached the New York Times bestsellers list and it's been so well received. But didn't write the book just to kind of have this heroic retelling of me crossing Antarctica solo. It's written in a way that anyone reading it can set it down, and my hope is that they can go out and achieve their own impossible first, no matter what that is in. It can be in food or health or music or art or culture or entrepreneurship. It really is applicable to everything, and it's not just the story of me crossing, but it's a story of my mother, a story of my wife and I, and what we've built and created over time, a story of our nonprofit, the story of kind of all the backstories and all the pieces in my life, ups and downs, failures and successes that all combined and cultivated into that. But certainly, one of the things that I found within that isolation, I found within the Drake Passage, I've learned about myself, is really just the power of the human spirit. Something that I think that we all really have within us, and also the power and importance of mindset. I like to say, pain is mandatory, but suffering is optional. What I mean by that, and it's sort of derivative of a lot of Buddhist teachings and things like that over time. It's certainly not just my own, but that life is hard. We are going to have setbacks. For me, it was being severely burned in a fire. The globe is facing a global pandemic right now. There are hard times that we're going to face, but we have the ability in our own mind to interpret those and react in our own ways, and kind of, I don't want to say soothe or ease that pain, but to actually look at that pain and not allow our fear, our anxiety, our doubt, our self-doubt to ratchet up as a result of that initial kind of objective feeling of pain. And even I found that crossing Antarctica, as the days got harder and harder, and I was running out of food, and my hips and my ribs were protruding, and physical pain was really immense. I also found deep moments of bliss and peace and calm. And the last chapter of my book is actually called Infinite Love, because I felt so much positive energy and resolve resounding from all around the world. Even though the physical nature of my body was full of pain, I didn't allow that to lead to deeper levels of suffering. In fact, within that, I found love and peace.
Mm. I really love that you say that. Of course, in Antarctica, you're in a very unique situation when there's no, you don't have the internet, you don't have a gazillion things pounding you and demanding your attention. And that hyper focus to what you're doing, I can see where that can open up to just a lot of joy and a lot of clarity and a lot of cleaning of the mind as much as cleaning of the body and cleaning of the spirit. Can you talk to me a little bit about what are some of the common pitfalls you see in other folks who are trying to work their way out of a mental situation? I mean, obviously everyone's not crossing Drake's Passage or Antarctica, but still we all have our challenges, as you mentioned. And if you could talk about what are some of the pitfalls that you like to encourage people not to fall into?
Yeah, I think that one of the things is we are the stories that we tell ourselves. I think that that's a really
Yes.
important concept. We are the stories that we tell ourselves, and so we actually get to choose and interpret our interior dialogue. And I'm not immune to this, and none of us are. We have that negative voice pop up sometimes. That voice of, you can't, I can't, I won't, I'm not good enough, all of that. We've all been there, oftentimes daily, are there. And one of the things that I've realized is that we have the ability to kind of rewire that. And some of my advice, for me in Antarctica, I'd wake up every single morning cold, afraid, alone, all the things. But before I could let all of that self-doubt seep in, I would actually say out loud, yell it out to the endless Antarctica white abyss. I'd say, Colin, you are strong, you are capable. You are strong, you are capable. And, sometimes I didn't necessarily even believe those words as they were coming out of my mouth, but it kind of rewired my brain in that orientation. And so I think that that's one of the common, things that I like to tell people is, tell yourself the story that you want to be, but also be a little bit easier on yourself. These are hard times, they are challenging, but it doesn't mean like that inner dialogue can either be really positive and uplifting, or it can be completely detrimental. Yes, objectively, we are all dealing with a global pandemic right now. There's really scary things going on. There's people that, maybe close to you that are suffering, or friends or family members who are working on the front lines and putting their own lives at risk to contain all of this. Like those are real things to be afraid of, to be anxious about. But there's another extra layer that sometimes we pile on ourselves in addition to that can be kind of leveled off. And I encourage people to kind of, try to distill the difference between those two.
Yeah, I love that you say that be a little bit easy on yourself, because the goal isn't perfection. The goal is just to get through and be the best you can be. And on some days that will be perfection maybe, but on other days it won't, but that's your best that day. So work with what you've got, and then just really, I love this, tell the story to yourself of who you want to be, and kind of underscore yourself with positivity, because we can often sabotage ourselves. But I think what you say is very encouraging, and I can understand why this kind of rationale has led you to your foundation with kids, which is, I think you've had for 5 years. I might have that wrong. How long have you had your foundation?
Yeah, my wife and I started in 2015. It's called Beyond 7-2. The numbers were, the first world record project we did was the 7 summits and the 2 poles, but really this ethos of, moving beyond that and inspiring beyond that. It really started out with really some really health-oriented initiatives around combating childhood obesity, and kind of using the platform of these expeditions to raise money and funds, and ultimately programs in public schools to combat childhood obesity. And health initiatives are still a huge part of the foundation, but it's even grown in scope. And now we've built these sort of STEM curriculums, so science, technology, engineering, and math curriculums that are integrated with the expedition. So while I'm out on an expedition, classrooms and students, last time during Drake Patches, there were 600,000 students enrolled in this specific program, and where they're excited and interested by the live expedition rather than the dusty textbook about something that happened 100 years ago. It's actually happening live, and the students feel like they can connect with me and ask me questions, etc. But all the while, their teachers are teaching them the lessons that they're already going to learn about climate, about the environment, about sociology, about friction of boats against water, and scale models of things in the engineering curriculum. And so it's a really fun way to bring these principles that they were going to learn anyways to life in a unique and interesting way, to really inspire that, as well as one of the questions I love to ask students, and I think it applies to everyone actually, but is this using mountain as a metaphor. What's your Everest? What is your big goal? What are your dreams? And I've heard amazing responses from students. My Mount Everest to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, or my Mount Everest is to make sure snow leopards are not the endangered species, whatever things students say. But really a process we bring them through around have that aspirational goal setting, and then actually implementing the systems and steps to achieve those goals, surrounded by the support in their communities.
Yeah, I mean, this embodies everything, because I think people learn through doing, and you're showing them firsthand that the joy is in the process. Yes, you want to reach your goal in Drake's Passage and Antarctica, of course, but it is that joy of the building, and that you can use the mathematics and the engineering and the world dynamics to make everyone curious about the world. And then yet the ultimate discovery, right, is the discovery of self. I love what you're teaching them. And then at the same time, you're teaching them about how this healthy diet helped you stay positive mentally and strong physically, such that you are the world record holder 10 times over for all the extreme things that you're doing. So I love that you have this foundation, and that you talk to people, kids and adults. You've done a bunch of TEDx talks and things. So, and your Discovery, do you know when the Discovery movie's going to be out?
It should be out this summer. Yeah, I don't have the specific date. Obviously, things have changed and evolved, but yeah, the book's out now. The Impossible First, you can check it out. Obviously, you can either order the book, or it's even easier to get things since the mail is somewhat delayed right now. Audiobook, I narrate the audiobook myself, and ebook and all that kind of stuff. But and then the Discovery documentary should be out later this summer.
I so love that. So the book is Impossible First. Everybody get that, of course. And if you want more information, incredible story, incredible inspiration, ColinOgrady.com. We have about 30 seconds, so I'm going to ask you for a 1-sentence answer. I know you say to yourself, Colin, you are strong when you're in a tough time. But if you're just not crossing Antarctic, but you're just in a regular day, you're having a bad day, is there one phrase you say to yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
This too shall pass.
This too shall pass. I love it. Colin O'Grady, thank you for doing all you do. Thank you for doing stuff for kids. Thank you for doing stuff for adults. It's the Elysabeth Alfano Show. We'll be right back after the break on WCGO. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around. I have another great guest right after Colin O'Grady. Wasn't he such an inspiration? I have another great inspirational guest with us. It is that famous segment that you all wait for. The doctor is dialed in, and I have Dr. Angie Sedeghi with me today. Doctor, how are you?
I'm doing well, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so happy that you're here. You are a gastroenterologist. Oh my gosh, I can barely say it. Just tell people what that is so we know.
Butts and guts.
Okay, butts and guts. I've never heard it put like that. Well, succinct and to the point.
That's what my brother calls me. Anyway, so yeah, it's all about the digestive tract, mouth to anus, the esophagus, the stomach, the small bowel and the large bowel, the pancreas and the liver.
Wow, so you cover a lot, actually.
Yes.
Let me ask you some pointed questions, because I think you can help us with just some common ailments that I think a lot of people suffer from. I understand that 65% of America is lactose intolerant, and that's higher in African American communities and Asian American communities. Some people might not realize that what's giving them gastrointestinal issues is dairy. Talk to me about the complications of dairy.
Absolutely. So dairy comes from cows or any other mammal and sold in stores commonly as health food. There's nothing healthy about eating dairy. The dairy industry promotes it as health food because it has calcium. There are much better sources of calcium than dairy because dairy also contains a lot of saturated fat, cholesterol, and hormones.
Yes.
That could cause cancer and definitely not a health food. Besides the hormones and the saturated fat, dairy also contains a lactose, a sugar that is not very well digested or broken down by the humans, especially after we wean off and we're not supposed to be breastfed in our old age. We lose the ability to break down this lactose sugar because we are deficient in the enzyme lactase. So what happens is we get a lot of symptoms from eating this dairy milk, including abdominal bloating and distension, which is a very common complaint in my clinic,
Yes.
constipation, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. So a lot of people associate lactose intolerance with diarrhea and abdominal pain, but they don't understand that you can still get constipation, bloating. So many of my patients who come in and who have been diagnosed previously with irritable bowel syndrome actually don't have irritable bowel syndrome. They have lactose intolerance. So the very first thing I do is I ask my patients to get off the dairy and come back in a month. And lo and behold, most of them come back feeling fine and they didn't have IBS to begin with.
I love that you say this. I'll take a step back and just give a shout out and appreciation for the human body. We're decades perhaps on dairy, having all these complications. We give it up for as little as 3 or 4 weeks and our body responds. Why would you go to medicine when, pills, when you could just step back the dairy? And you're talking about gastroenterology issues such as bloating and uncomfort, which for some people can be quite extreme. But that's not the only list, as I understand it, for dairy. It's also acne and for some people, asthma. So,
Yes.
imagine those people who are short of breath. Oh my gosh.
Elizabeth, I think we've talked about this. I had debilitating pustular eczema, and I was itchy from head to toe for many, many years. And none of my dermatologists ever said you could be allergic to dairy. So there are proteins and sugars in dairy that cause severe allergies, asthma, and skin problems, and of course acne as well, because of all the hormones like the growth factors, the estrogen, the testosterone, the progesterone. Most people don't understand that when they give their kids dairy, they're giving them testosterone and estrogen. So that could contribute to endometriosis in their teenagers down the line. That could cause acne in their teenagers down the line. So, it's unfortunate that dairy is sold as health food. The only thing dairy has is calcium, but like I said before, there are tons of other sources of calcium, and dairy should not be used. Yes. Exactly. Yes. Give your kids tahini, or broccoli or edamame. Calcium is plentiful in plant foods, but unfortunately, most people don't know that. And when we think of calcium, we think of dairy. It's so indoctrinated in our culture to eat dairy. It's going to take time, but thanks to people like yourself who are increasing awareness, dairy is not health food. Another thing is most men don't know that dairy causes prostate cancer. This is important that people know that. And so people who have diabetes, God knows we have so much diabetes in this country, obesity and diabetes, and dairy has a lot of saturated fat that could contribute to type 2 diabetes. So there's another reason. I mean, I can go on and on.
Yes, and now we have type 2 diabetes in children, something you never saw before and has become quite common. Diabetes, really, people think it's because they're eating too much sugar, but it's really because they're eating too much fat. Really quick overview here, doctor, correct me if I'm wrong. The fat kind of buffers the cells so that any sugar in the bloodstream isn't filtered out because it can't get through your cells because they're just kind of buffered in fat. That is the layman's explanation. I'm sure I've got something wrong in there. So, yeah.
The saturated fat basically inhibits the glucose transporter systems. So the glucose can't get in and it can't clear out your blood. So pretty much it's the fat inside the cells that destroys the glucose transporter system, and then the sugar can't get in. So the sugar goes up. And so most people think, oh, it was the sugar that caused diabetes. But the actual cause of it was the saturated fat. No, I'm not promoting eating sugar. Refined sugar is definitely not good for you. But now there's this unfortunate thought that, oh, you can't have fruits. No, that's not sugar, that's fruits. That's bound to fiber. The entire hormonal metabolism of fruit is different than processed sugar. But you're right, the cause of diabetes is saturated fat. Pure white refined sugar just makes it worse.
This makes it worse. Okay, so we're talking about this fatty diet that can come from dairy that isn't good for us for a bunch of reasons. And if you want to read T. Colin Campbell's book, he can talk about casein and how it turns on a cancer gene for women. And, so much I could talk to you about, Dr. Sedeghi. But let's stick with fat there for a second. So it's not just that it can lead us towards diabetes, but it also can lead us towards colorectal cancer if we're having a very fatty meat diet. So tell me about that, since you're a colon expert.
So colon cancer is the second biggest cancer killer in both men and women in the United States, and it kills it causes disease in hundreds of thousands of people in the United States. And so we need to do screening tests to prevent cancer. But beyond that, the question is, what causes cancer? Well, the World Health Organization just labeled processed meat as carcinogenic. What that means is all the processed meat that's sold in restaurants and grocery stores, like bacon, sausage, certain lunch meats, these things are carcinogenic, which means directly cause cancer. This is very important for people to understand, because just like the World Health Organization has basically labeled cigarette smoking as carcinogenic, it is, we have to understand that processed meat is also carcinogenic, and one should stay clear away from processed meat. As far as red meat, we also know that red meat is associated with cancer, with colorectal cancer, and it could perhaps be due to the heme iron that is in the meat, which causes reactive oxygen species, and it can be carcinogenic. So if you're eating, my suggestion is, if you're eating processed meat, please stop, avoid it like the plague. If you're eating red meat, slowly you may want to crowd it out by incorporating a lot of fiber-rich foods in your diet, because fiber actually does the exact opposite, and it's protective against colorectal cancer.
So much information there. I'm going to see if I can give everybody the cliff notes. Meat has no fiber.
Right.
You've got this huge long intestinal tract. Meat has no fiber. It's going to sit in your system for several days. This is not good for you. And you want to have high fiber foods. That's going to help you pull all of this stuff out of your system and stay away from processed meats. Just so that people know, we're talking about bacon, sausage, bologna, sandwich meat. No. If it's okay with you, Dr. Sedeghi, I will mention Dr. Greger and say that he does a fabulous 3-minute video explaining how processed meats are carcinogenic. And he does this to the USDA Nutritional Guidelines Committee. They're about to come out with their nutritional nutritional guidelines for 2020, 2025. I'm going to put up a link on my website. You can go to it on the WCGO radio website. You can go to it right after this. If you want to use your voice to let the USDA know that you do not want processed meats or meats and you do not want dairy on the upcoming 2020, 2025 guidelines, they are putting those together now. So you've given us so much information to go on, Dr. Sedeghi. I wonder, for those who are starting now, what's the first thing they should do? Because it can be a bit overwhelming. So how do people start by going on a plant-based diet?
Well, what I would say is say goodbye to the most poisonous food group in the world, which is dairy, in my opinion, because I see so many people have IBS and GI problems, and it's caused by dairy. So say goodbye today. And if you want to help with the mission of getting dairy off the plate for the new USDA guidelines coming out, please go to Switch for Good or go to my Instagram, Angie.Sedeghi. And I made a post and showed that 65% of the people globally are lactose intolerant. And there is a form. If you just go into my bio, if you click on the bio, it's a Switch for Good. Basically, it'll take you to a page for Switch for Good, and you could cast your vote. It takes you 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes of your time, and you can your voice will be heard by the USDA through Switch for Good.
Yes, I hope everybody will do this. Please let your voice be known, because you do have the power and the say, and the USDA guidelines are coming shortly. So you want to have your voice be known. Thanks for joining me, Dr. Sedeghi. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. See you next Sunday.